Dr. Pinkert asked me if that was brief enough. But we want to thank you, Dr. Pinkert, for that gracious introduction, and I want to say just how pleased I am to be here. I want to thank the UNCF leadership and the Kresge Foundation for their sponsorship for making this gathering possible. And I will say that there's nothing that presidents like better than talking about their own institutions. So I am really happy to be here to do that. The theme of this morning is the journey to green, from commitment to realization. And I am happy to tell you about our journey at Spelman College. Every journey has a beginning, and for me, the journey began before I came to Spelman. You heard that I worked for a number of years in Massachusetts. I lived in Northampton, Massachusetts for 20 years, where recycling was mandatory as part of the town government structure, and so I developed that habit. And I worked at Mount Holyoke for 13 years, where we also recycled. So in Massachusetts, both at home and at work, recycling was a requirement. Also, during my tenure at Mount Holyoke, a large-scale construction project was underway for a new science facility, and I was privy to conversations about a donor who was willing to make a very large contribution to the project on the condition that it was designed as a green building, eligible for LEED certification. So I brought two things with me from Massachusetts to Spelman, at least two things. One was the habit of recycling, and the other was an awareness that there was philanthropic interest, at least in some places, in environmental sustainability. When I arrived in Atlanta, however, in 2002, and conscientiously separated my recyclables, as was my habit, I was dismayed to learn that there was no recycling program on campus, or even in the city of Atlanta. And all the stuff I was separating was just being recombined when it got picked up. So that was disappointing to me, but I turned my attention to other concerns at the college, and one of those concerns was that our student population had grown significantly during the previous decade, but no housing had been added. In fact, some of the available housing had been transformed into administrative office space, and we were in danger of becoming a commuter campus, at that time only able to house just slightly more than 50% of our students. So we began to make plans for the possibility of a new residence hall, and in 2004, we had the opportunity to acquire the land immediately adjacent to our campus and began planning for a new residence hall. The board had to be persuaded that this would be an affordable project, as we would have to issue a bond to finance it, and the board was reluctant to take on any additional debt. But my CFO and I made the financial case, and I certainly made the educational case in terms of the importance of restoring the residential character to our campus, and I'm happy to say the project was approved. But as is often the case, the project turned out to be more expensive than originally planned for a couple of reasons. One was, as we began to explore the digging up of the land and looking at the underground piping, we discovered that there were a lot of decaying pipes underground that would have to be replaced in order to support the HVAC systems for the building and other infrastructure issues. But also, the start of our project was shortly after Hurricane Katrina. And if you tried to build anything right after Hurricane Katrina, you know that construction costs really skyrocketed because of the short supply of building materials and all of the construction that was taking place in the New Orleans area. So some of you I know in this room, in the HBCU community, certainly know our very talented Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Danny Flanagan. And Danny was doing the best he could to ensure our project was on time and close to on budget as possible. So when I said to Danny that I wanted this to be a green project, he was not that excited. His response to me was that it would be too expensive, we couldn't afford it, and that it would add millions to the cost. But in preparation for this talk, I was looking at my email trail, and every couple weeks I'd send him an email that said, exactly how much more would it be? What would it take to make this a green building? When it became clear to him that I was not going to give up on the idea, he did investigate further and talked with the folks working on the building, and it turned out that the real number was between $1 to $1.5 million. On what was, at that point, a $43 million project. So in the scheme of things, not that much, or less than 5%, not nearly as expensive as we might have feared. So even though the additional upfront cost for this beautiful building, which you see displayed on the screen, was still a concern, it was clear to me that it was in the college's best interest to pursue the goal of LEED certification. And it didn't take too long for Danny to become a convert to the idea. And he was certainly aided in his thinking by the person he had recently hired, who is Art Frazier. Art is here. Art is the Director of Facilities Management Services at Spelman. And Art is an architect by training and has worked on other sustainability projects prior to his employment at Spelman. And so when he came on board, he was also very enthusiastic about the idea of this green project. And I might say that Art and I kind of double-teamed Danny. With Art's help, we were able to work with construction partners who also brought green expertise to the task, and we were on our way. The founders of Spelman College, Spelman is an institution where the history of the college is well known. Students memorize it when they first arrive, and I'm sure if you ask some of the Spelman students who are here today who founded Spelman College, they can easily tell you, Harriet E. Giles and Sophia B. Packard. And Miss Giles and Miss Packard, as we call them, often said back in 1881 when they were creating this institution that they were building for 100 years. And the quality of the buildings on the historic campus that is Spelman reflect that expectation. In fact, my office is the same one that every Spelman president before me has used, located in a building that was dedicated in 1886. So when we began planning for this new building, the first new construction in our campus in the 21st century, I too said, we are building for 100 years. And so how could we build a building that we expected to last for a century in the 21st century and not make it environmentally sustainable? How could it not be green? At least that is how I felt about it. And so on August 24th, 2006, in our opening school convocation, I said the following words: "I'm delighted to tell you that construction will begin on our new residence hall in October, the first new construction of the 21st century at Spelman. And that new residence hall will be what is known as a green building, designed to minimize environmental impact in terms of energy use, water runoff, and other environmental factors. Like Ms. Packard and Ms. Giles, we are building for the next 100 years, and we have to pay attention to our environmental impact and educate our community to pay attention as well." And that is what we have been doing. Certainly it's what we did relative to the building, and relative to the education, what we are continuing to do. Now, clearly, it was the right thing to do for all the environmental reasons that we know and we heard Michael Lomax speak about so eloquently yesterday. But it was also the strategic thing to do, and I want to say a word about that. We knew that we are educating, what we like to say, women who will be change agents in the world, and it seemed to me we had to model that behavior. So we would be modeling social responsibility for our students, many of whom who were already expressing interest in environmental causes and in and out of not only in the classroom, but out of the classroom. We would also set an example for other institutions. We were aware that this was not something that had been done before on other HBCU campuses. And we would generate long-term savings, particularly in terms of utility costs. And we would position the institution favorably with donors who valued green commitments. And I already knew of at least one generous donor who did. When we broke ground in late 2006, and our new residence hall and dining complex, known as the Suites, now home to 300 students, opened in 2008 and has been awarded LEED Silver certification. Some of the sustainable features, and I'm not going to tell you all of them, but just to mention some of them, and Art is doing a presentation this afternoon at 2, and we'll give you more of those details. An underground parking deck, which includes preferred parking for low emission and fuel-efficient vehicles, as well as secured parking for bicycles. A previous parking lot that was adjacent to the building site was converted to a green space for students. 79% of the